Betsy Ann Thomas for the American Intelligence Media. Oh, isn't that something? It feels like we were 6 years ago when we just started this program, and when reading the Durham report to see that it took him 6 friggin' years to tell the world what we were telling you back in 2016 and 17. And then what? Now all these people are going to walk free, Douglas, because of the statute of limitations. And is there a statute of limitations to treason?
Well, Betsy, in the old days, I used to get tired of saying, "We told you so." But we did tell you so. And we told you exactly what would happen. We told you what would happen with the Mueller report. We told you what would happen with the dossier, which they called the Carter dossier, Carter Page dossier, or the Page dossier. And we told you who the real criminals were. They were Brits. Arvinder Sambhai was James Comey's handler. She was his equivalent in Britain. And it was Stephen Halpern who tried to hook in Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, and other people. And so it was a British attack against America, but we used to call it in the old days the globalists. We now would call it the Pilgrim Society, or agents of the crown, basically. So if you go back and you do a search on our site for the 28 treasonous crimes of James Comey, you will find that the Durham report, go ahead, read all 314 pages. It will tell you about 1/3 of the people who were part of that crime. Now, the reality is that when you have a special investigator like that, just like with Robert Mueller, Mueller, prosecuted 2 people, Manafort, put him in jail. I think he's still in jail. He prosecuted George Papadopoulos, and that's what's supposed to happen when you have a special investigator. As you go along, you find crimes, you prosecute them. Then at the end, you write up a report, you turn it over to the Department of Justice, and then the Department of Justice will do something with it. Remember, Robert Mueller's report was turned over to whom? It was turned over to Bill Barr. And before that, it was Jeff Sessions, both of whom were traitors. They were part of this treasonous action. Recently, you saw on Capitol Hill that the flag was flying upside down. That means we have been overrun. There is an emergency. We have been subverted by the enemy, and the criminal war actors have taken over DC, which I used to call all the time the District of Crime. Now, let's not forget that this Russia investigation from Mueller was fake. It found nothing, but made sure to use some dicey languages in the end of it, in its summary, so that people still yell on mainstream media, Russia, Russia, Russia. Trump was with Russia. Trump was with Alpha Bank. Franklin Foer put in Slate, the magazine, the online magazine, that Trump had met with Natalia Veselnitskaya and others, and that he was totally compromised with the Russians. We now know none of that is true. Okay, none of it's true. And we also know, because we pointed it out at that point, and nobody else was pointing it out, that the crime goes much, much deeper. And then we pointed out that Arvinder Sambhai, the handler for Comey, came over and had dinner with Bruce and Nellie Orr. Nellie Orr working for Fusion GPS, creating fake lies, and then being...
And her husband is the paymaster for the SCS over at the DOJ. Oh, and you know, another thing, and I'll get off the microphone, is that the Durham report did not tell us about the British influence over our elections.
This was an overthrow of America. There's nothing higher in treason than to create fraudulent elections. Well, this is all about fraudulent elections. If you've been following us, that we discovered that Optech is in every single, and its newest version, version 3, is in every single election machine. So when you say Dominion won the case against Fox News, no, they didn't. Fox News got it mixed up and said that Dominion, a different Dominion LLC, which is funded by China, they tried to say that the Dominion that was founded in Canada, which does still rule our elections, was supported by China. That's not true.
Give me a break. Fox News full well knew that it was pointing the finger to the wrong company.
They absolutely knew it.
Okay. And they're all owned in part by BlackRock. So it's just one big club and we aren't in it. But we are getting effed by these people. And I am just so pissed that Lisa Page probably is down there at the Starbucks with her lover boy getting a coffee, and they are not hanging in the gallows in DC.
Yes, these are treasonous acts. There's literally hardly anything higher than this overthrowing of an election, overthrowing of a sitting president, investigating a sitting president when there was no reason to do so. The Durham report now says, in its 314 pages, that basically there was a second investigation after Robert Mueller, who then said that, yes, there was weaponization of the DOJ and the FBI, but nothing was done. As a matter of fact, when Comey was kicked out and Christopher Wray came in as the head of the FBI, he said he was going to do a training. And that training covered the treasonous acts, the 28 treasonous acts of Comey. And by the way, now we could probably do another report and add many more treasonous acts of James Comey, who had the gall to come out again and again after he was fired by Trump for treason, should have been for treason, but basically because he had leaked to his continual leaking partner with one of the major newspapers all of this information. That was election interference. And what was it for? It was to cover up for Hillary's server in her house, which was giving CC copies of everything she did as the Secretary of State to the Chinese and to anybody who paid for that information. Also, it was her Uranium One deal, which was with Putin, which was in Kazakhstan. And basically, that Uranium One deal was Bill and Hillary Clinton working with Frank Giustra, who is one of the biggest crown agents in Canada, and his fake gold, Barrick gold, that's all fake, and his uranium is fake. And so there was no uranium. It was a deal where Hillary sold out the uranium of America to the Russians, which still to this day, who do you think decommissions our ICBMs, our nuclear weapons? Russia does. And then the plant, what's it called? It's in New Mexico. It's called uranium, I think, is owned by the Queen. So the Queen and Putin at that time.
At that time,
the Queen.
It's that fat finger king over there.
Sausage finger is now in charge of basically the uranium in America, along with Putin to this very day. So Putin can't possibly be our enemy because he helps us decommission our ICBMs. He decommissioned the ICBMs, the nuclear weapons that were in Ukraine, and that's how some of them got to North Korea. We've told you all of this before. So basically all this is a review so that you will know that what we told you was true. The Mueller report would do nothing because there was nothing. It was sweeping the evidence under the rug. Even Joseph Mifsud was interviewed by Robert Mueller and then released, and he's of course disappeared since and never been heard from again. Also, other Russian agents, Natalia Veselnitskaya, Millian, many others, they interviewed them. He interviewed all those people so that it could go into a secret file that no one could ever look at because it was a special investigator. A special investigator and special counsels are like a British Star Chamber. We already know the outcome before it starts. So Paul Manafort went to jail, and they went after Roger Stone, but did they go after John Podesta? What happened to the Podesta brothers who did the exact same thing in Ukraine? And by the way, don't let that slip by you. During this entire Russian investigation, it was really about payments to Hunter Biden in Ukraine through Burisma. And of course, Joe Biden, the vice president at that time, and Obama ordered these things along with Valerie Jarrett, along with Susan Rice. We have the testimony of people who were in the room. We actually have the conversation where they admitted that they were doing this as interference in the election so Hillary could get elected. And that was because there was such a landslide with Trump that the normal rigging of Lord Mark Malloch Brown and his Optech software and his Smartmatic LLC and Dominion, not a PLC or LLC, just Dominion and Smartmatic. They accused Smartmatic of being part of the election rigging at that time to basically change the votes right in front of all of Americans in the middle of the night. What was really going on was it's a selection process. The British have been selecting our leaders in the countries for a long time. And when they don't get the person elected, George Soros, the CIA, and a bunch of non-government organizations come in, and through a color revolution, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and later the Maidan Revolution, those were American-stimulated CIA operations through the British influence and through George Soros's money. So George Soros is nothing more than a front guy for the British and for the, as Michael McKibben always says, it's not the CIA, it's the British CIA. So this is the same old story. We told you from the beginning that nothing will happen with Durham. It will be sweeping the evidence under the rug. He will interview those people. He will not bring any charges against anyone. At least at one point, Sussman and another person got charges and they went to jail for 2 weeks. Whoo! And that was for the weaponization of the DOJ and the FBI after the Comey scandal and after the Andrew McCabe scandal. Andrew McCabe followed Comey as the director of the FBI, and then Christopher Wray. All of them need to be tried for treason and hung or shot. But for sure, their life needs to be forfeited because they did the worst thing they could possibly do, an overthrow of our republic. It's all unconstitutional what they did.
And then today, Jim Jordan comes out with Matt Gaetz because they've got a whistleblower to say that the FBI has been politicized and from within. These men, these congressional men, Jordan and Gaetz, they're complete low information troglodytes that they don't know yet that the FBI is controlled by our special relationship with Britain through Five Eyes, and that they continue to spread this incomplete information to people. You know, I used to be high on Jordan and Gaetz, but now I'm not. And then you've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr., another low information troglodyte, saying the CIA, they murdered his uncle and his father. Are you a friggin' idiot? Haven't you done your research? Don't you understand that the CIA, formerly the OSS, is Five Eyes? This is a British operation to take down America. And our congressional people and presidential hopefuls can't get their heads out of the dark place of their body and look at the truth and give it out. I'm just sick of it, Thomas.
Well, we sit back and wonder if there's any hope whatsoever. And at this point, it looks like there's no hope. There's no hope because why? It got worse after that. After all the evidence was there, after the proof was there, after the Crossfire Hurricane was shown to have no substantial evidence that opened those investigations, which then changed its name, I forget, 6, 10, 12 times, so that it would always be new. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were the ones who were conducting that. But it was with John Brennan's approval. It was with Clapper's approval. It was with the approval of all the people, Loretta Lynch. It was later Sally Yates, on and on and on. So when you see the meme out there that shows you a list of about 20 people who the Durham report all stated acted inappropriately, those are all treasonous bastards. They're treasonous monsters. They hate America. They've been paid off. They are nothing more than crown agents. Now, let's remember, Obama knew all about this. And that's the reason that Joe Biden right now is still protected. Let's not forget that Joe Biden used to be right-handed. He's left-handed now. Look at his earlobes. They're not the same. He's the guy who had 2 brain aneurysm operations. If you have a brain aneurysm operation, you can't get a health approval from the Surgeon General to run for president. How come none of this is being remembered? How come there's no memory capacity in the American public? In most cases, certainly 2/3 of Americans don't remember any of these things I'm telling you. And basically, remember that it was about Ukraine. Remember that the second impeachment, or the first impeachment, I guess it was all about Ukraine in a conversation that Trump had. No, it wasn't. It was about Burisma. It was about Christopher Hines, John Kerry's son. It was about Pelosi's nephew. It was about Hunter Biden being on Burisma. It was about George Soros being on the second largest, actually the largest oil company in Ukraine. But Burisma controlled where the money was spent. They took $27 billion from the IMF that they did not pay back. They are in fantastic debt. When you now hear the numbers of the money that we've given to Ukraine, they'll tell you it's, 20 billion. No. At this point, it's about $135 billion, and that doesn't include the military equipment that we sent them. But also remember, the military equipment we sent them was our dead military equipment, which Putin has already blown up. So Ukraine, the most corrupt country in the world, is now still being used for the Biden crime family and the Pelosi crime family and Cofer Black, Mitt Romney,
Kerry.
the Kerry crime family, the Mitt Romney crime family. They are still getting payoffs to this day. Every time we send billions of dollars to Ukraine, it does not go to Ukraine. That is just stupid if you believe that. We conducted 2 overthrows of the government when the previous president of Ukraine was elected. America didn't like who was elected, so they went in and they conducted 2 color revolutions that overthrew and replaced him with Petro.
Well, it looks like the Purple Revolution here in America has been successful as well.
Correct. We used to call it all the time the Purple Revolution, and it is a color revolution. We have been overthrown. We no longer have a constitution that's being enforced. That's why we have no security at the border. That's why Biden hasn't been charged. Remember, here's the big secret. Yes, the fake Biden was in on the meeting with Obama, Valerie Jarrett, and all the rest of them, Susan Rice, when they planned the dossier attack on Trump for Hillary Clinton. And so that is treason. That is election interference. That's fraud. It's the list of crimes is unbelievable. Now, are any of those people going to be prosecuted? Well, Durham did not recommend that anyone be prosecuted. His report now goes to Biden's head of the DOJ, and then the head of the DOJ then determines whether or not anybody will be prosecuted. No one's going to be prosecuted. We told you this from day one. We told you also that Bill Barr was he's the one who helped Bush get with the hanging Chad fiasco, took it to the Supreme Court. Well, when Trump brought the evidence of 6,000 sworn statements of people who witnessed the election fraud, the election corruption, not to mention the fact that the pandemic created possibilities for each state to create new laws for mail-in ballots. We know that in Pennsylvania alone, there was 2.1 million fake mail-in ballots. But Bill Barr said that Homeland Security, DOJ, the FBI checked it all out, and there was not one single fraudulent vote during the election that overthrew Trump. Now, when you go back to the first election with Trump, that was the Russian dossier, what they call the Page dossier or the PP dossier, which was all fake. Every speck of it was fake. It was produced by Comey. Comey was the head of the FBI, and he used a person named Felix Sater, who had been a long time agent for the FBI and CIA. He also used Carter Page. Carter Page, who was the person they focused on and said was the go-between between Trump and Alpha Bank and the payoffs from Russia to Trump and the Russian hackers who affected the election. No, that is all fake. Putin's chef, as they called that group that they accused of creating all of that. No, that was done by the Global Engagement Center. It's an American spy mechanism that took Obama's changing of the national NCAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and made it legal to spy on Americans, to target and attack Americans. And they're the ones who use Cambridge Analytica as an excuse, saying that Trump had used Cambridge Analytica. Well, their group, the SCA, the Strategic Communication Laboratory, was ran by Stephen Halpern. Stephen Halpern was the British spy working with the appointed top secret agent for basically the British FBI, who was Comey's handler. It was Halpern and it was Arvinder Sambai who actually were controlling all of this. They came over and had dinner with Bruce and Nellie Orr, for heaven's sake.
That was Allison's.
Okay, that's possible. It's been so long, I haven't reviewed these things.
Right, but she's a prosecutor in the United Kingdom.
Correct.
Why is she having dinner the day before John Hannigan comes over and wiretaps Trump Towers? And John Hannigan is MI6. So I'm telling you, people, we've been overrun by the British. And as our research continues, we know that that is the British Pilgrim Society. We backtracked it to the Babylonian Radanites. And you need to ask yourself who you're listening to on alt media and why they haven't reported these things. So, I've listened to people and they don't even talk about the senior executive services. Oh, that's the bat phone.
Yes, John Hannigan. Good point, Betsy. John Hannigan came over to America, used the NSA to spy on Trump at Trump Towers so they could spy on the meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya and 3 other Russians, 2 of whom were known as Russian spies, who the State Department took allowed them to come into this country illegally so that they could have these meetings, so they could set them up and they could spy on them. And also, that's the excuse they used to say that Trump's server was in communication with Alpha Bank and 3 very large Russian oligarchs, and that's who was paying him off. Well, that was found to be completely false. And Franklin Furor, who actually spent a year setting that up, they sprang this October surprise, as they do often with an election. They come out with some dirt in October. Well, Comey got so excited that in early spring, actually it started all the way back in March, they set this up because they had done an investigation to find out what Hillary's greatest weakness was. It was Uranium One deal and her server, which was basically sending CC copies to Russia, to China, and to everyone who was paying to play. Well, Biden thought that he would do the same when he got in office. So as a vice president, he was part of all of this. But remember, that's not Biden. That's not Biden. Anyone who believes that's Biden is just completely naive. And why do you think that Hunter Biden was so emboldened that he, after he ripped off America through the International Monetary Fund, $27 billion, which went through Burisma and never got to anyone in Ukraine, he then was making $1 million, unbelievable amounts of millions of dollars through his Ukrainian associations. We now know that they were setting up a P4 labs to collect poisonous, supposedly, viruses that then they would use to weaponize through gain of function. That's all well known. There was not 12 of those labs. There was over 24 of those labs, and some of them were owned by the Bidens. And then he went to China. Remember, he went with his dad to China and got paid millions of dollars for some kind of deal that nobody even knows what that was about. And now we know through the investigation of Hunter's laptop, remember it's not, they call it his laptop. There were 4 Hunter laptops. Hunter Biden is insane. He's a sex-crazed maniac. And why don't they prosecute him? Because he knows the ultimate secret. He can bring it all down. And what is that? He can testify that the Joe Biden now, the lookalike, is not Joe Biden. Do you know how big of a crime that is? That's beyond treason, okay? Biden knew that that wasn't Joe Biden. And anyone who can look at his ears or look at the fact that he's changed hands, he now writes left-handed, he signs things left-handed. And if you look at the old Joe Biden, it's not the same. They simply took all the sound bites that they had, and you always notice that the Joe Biden gets the questions ahead of time. He has to practice the answers, and he usually has an earphone in his ear. And as Obama said that he doesn't need to be president again. He just wants to be the person speaking into the ear of the president. That is literally what is happening, folks, and it has been. And if you haven't noticed that, the same thing happened with Hillary. Hillary, in all of the debates, had an earphone in, and you can see it on her body, and you can see it clear as a bell. And she also knew the questions ahead of time. We know that because that came out. So Hillary's not going to be prosecuted. The O'Bidens aren't going to be prosecuted. And the O'Biden family, every member of the O'Biden family has now been implicated through the Hunter Biden laptops. And his sister, his brother, every single Biden is involved in pay for play. This is known so clearly. And do you think the Congress is going to do anything? Let's remember, the Congress actually did an investigation of Andrew McCabe and found him guilty on 5 points. 4 of those points were 4 separate investigations on the Clinton Foundation, including Uranium One and many others. And Andrew McCabe had thrown all of those investigations out, so they never were finished. So he was found to be guilty. What happened? They said they weren't going to do anything about it. He crybabied, and he still got his SES retirement.
Look, we could spend the next 3 hours going over all this, but we just wanted to come on and say, yep, we told you so. We told you it'd be swept under the rug. We told you nobody's going anywhere. Thomas, what are we going to do? Our country has been overthrown. What do we do as citizens on the ground?
Well, first off, we should paint the sad picture that as many as 81 countries are joining BRICS right now. So that means that the what used to be called the petrodollar, and we went back to the petrodollar. We were off the petrodollar with Trump for 4 years. The first thing Biden did is he stopped all of our oil production offshore and on land. He stopped all the pipelines, the oil pipelines. We were more than self-sufficient with oil. We were selling oil to the rest of the world at a huge rate. First thing he did is he stopped all the oil production, and he went to being dependent upon Russian oil, so that 27% of our oil in the first weeks of Biden becoming president were linked to the Russians. The Russians are not our enemy. But now, because the British have declared war, and remember, the first acts of war were not in the Donbass region. Those 2 regions had voted to, with a legal vote, without Russian interference, they voted to secede from Ukraine and join Russia. And then what happened? Petro Poroshenko, what's his name? The president of Ukraine started bombing. Poroshenko started bombing the Donbass region, his own people. And they literally exhausted every bit of ammunition they had, killing their own people in Donbass. So Russia did move in after that to try to defend the Russians who were living there, who had voted to become independent and join the Russian Confederacy, or kind of like Belarus, almost exactly like Belarus. It was British commandos who went into Russian territory from Ukraine and blew up the power plant that was running 2 pipelines through Ukraine. So the pipeline blowing up scenario started with the British, and of course that's who blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2. And basically it was British commandos. And you'll hear this in the news all the time, that top British commandos were killed in the Donbass region. Well, what are they doing there? Britain has already mobilized for war and declared war upon Russia. Same thing with Germany, same thing with Poland. They're in NATO. They can't aid a non-NATO country to attack Russia without declaring war. So technically, NATO is at war with Russia. Why? Because that's why NATO was created.
Yeah, but you're assuming that these thugs play by the rules of war, of modern warfare. They don't. King Charles is not going to come out and say that he is charging war with Russia, but he's doing it.
That's a fact.
And he is the enemy. King Charles, the British Pilgrim Society, they are at war with Russia.
Yes. And they're now giving them planes, and they're giving them these...
them being Ukraine.
And they're giving them special missiles, which are being launched into Russia. And everything you hear coming out of Ukraine is a lie. And of course, everything that the Russians say is at least partial lie. That's just the way it's always been because of the Cold War. And so what you're hearing has nothing to do with reality. When the British blew up the power plant that ran a pipeline through Belarus and another one through northern Ukraine, that was the declaration of war. And that is why when the Russians found out that was going to happen, they put all their attack helicopters on the border between Belarus and Ukraine in the northern part, basically ready to attack Kiev. And they also mobilized and put their mobilized military on the eastern border of Ukraine, the western border of Russia, because they knew they were going to be attacked. And these attacks continue to this day. When they blew up the only bridge to the Crimea, that was the British. That wasn't the Ukrainians. The Azov battalion had already been destroyed completely. So when you hear anything about Ukraine or you hear Zelensky speak, it's a lie.
But I can understand all these people, all these countries joining BRICS because of the issue of gold. And I know you and I dispute that a little bit about what's going on, but let's just say that it's there and it's being discussed whether their economies are going to be gold-based and standard, the gold standard be used. But on the other hand, a lot of these BRICS countries have been victims of the British imperial empire for hundreds of years. India needs to throw off the Brits. So does China. So does South Africa. I think they're gathering to throw the Brits off the planet.
Well, the British created Russian Bolsheviks. They created Leninism. They created Marx. Remember, they were the incubator for all of these isms. Fascism was basically incubated in the city of London, and also through members of parliament who literally funded Karl Marx and Engels to write those documents. So, and also Mao Zedong was basically funded by the British, and it was another incubated form of communism. So communism was created. Now, you want to talk about the Atlantic Council, which is the propaganda arm of NATO, which creates the nonsense that tries to make Russia always look like the enemy. Well, Alexander Chalupa, along with Felix Sater, and along with Comey and Comey's many attempts with his treasonous attacks upon our Constitution and the election, and Trump, what was going on there? That is the propaganda arm of the NATO. And Alexander Chalupa was literally the person who was feeding all this information to the world so that it wouldn't come back to the Brits. So you won't see anything in the Durham report about anybody British, nothing about Stephen Halpern.
That's because he's a crown agent and he has to protect the British.
Absolutely. And why is that? Because the British basically have set up a system here in America that disallowed us ever to have freedom even after the American Revolution. They set up our first banks. They set up the wars. They created the wars. They created the false flags that started the wars that got America into one war after the next.
They started this nasty bureaucratic operation that controls our agencies called the Senior Executive Services,
which to this day, that's who Andrew McCabe was. That's who Bruce Orr was. That's who Nellie Orr was. Those are people who are paid way more than anybody else in the government according to their pay schedule, because they are specialists in their area and they rule over one of the 56 federal agencies. And so almost everybody who's appointed as the head of an agency becomes an SES member. And so they get special treatment, special salaries, special bonuses. And who gives out those bonuses? Bruce Orr, the man who found out that the man that we found out was behind paying Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson. That whole thing was through Mark Elias and through Perkins Coie. We pointed this out so many times that if you really want the ultra details on this, you can go back and look up these reports we've written. But nobody else is reporting this. Literally, no one else ever reported the British connection, except to mention the walrus, Stephen Halpern, who had basically tricked George Papadopoulos. But remember, who was
Steele is British.
Yes, and Christopher Steele, who wrote the dossier, who says that it was nothing more than a piece of propaganda. There was no truth whatsoever in it. Remember that George Papadopoulos, when he went to Britain, though he had never met Trump once, never spoken to Trump once, he was just an ancillary person for foreign policy on oil. He was treated like royalty by Stephen Halpern, by Arvinder Sambhai, and by Boris Johnson. There are pictures of Boris Johnson with his arm around George Papadopoulos like they are best friends. Holy moly. And then when you know that it's the Strategic Communication Laboratory that produced that, because it was Stefan Halpern who was Christopher Steele's boss. Don't forget that. And then don't forget that the people at Fusion GPS paid for it. And then Mark Elias, who was working as the lawyer for the Democratic National Committee, also, don't forget Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and don't forget the lady Brazil, what's her name, who took over her job. When they found out that the Democratic National Committee had hired Dmitry Alperovitch, who was a Russian spy who had been jailed by the FBI early on and then started working for the FBI. He's the only person who ever looked at the server at the Democratic National Committee, and he gave a false report about Russian GRU spies and Russian footprints, Cozy Bear and what a Fuzzy Bear, whatever the names, these funny names they give to basically the NSA of Russia, said that they had broken in and that they had stolen information. No. John Podesta was keeping on that's why they killed that young man. I forget his name. They murdered him because he had already stated, he had told his parents and other people he was bringing the evidence from the Democratic National Committee's computer system of the corruption, and that was just so phenomenal, that also demonstrated that Hillary Clinton didn't have a secure server and that everything they were doing was being given to our enemies. Well, John Podesta is one of the most crooked people who ever was in Washington, D.C. He's a pedophile. He and his brother did the same crimes in Ukraine that Paul Manafort went to jail for, and that they tried to put Roger Stone in jail for. No, John Podesta was literally the kingpin of this type of corruption. He was the person who assigned the people to the SES. So the people who were appointed by Obama, 10,000 people were appointed by Obama to the SES and to other federal agencies as the bosses of those agencies. John Podesta chose every one of them, and every one of them immediately got security clearances, expedited security clearances through a company that Hillary Clinton owned. And Hillary Clinton also owns the public key infrastructure. So she owns the cryptology that even the military, the CIA, the FBI, the DOJ uses. So there's nothing that Hillary didn't know or couldn't go in and change or make evidence disappear. And so Hillary was supposed to become the Queen of America. She would have bombed Damascus and started World War III. She was going to go after remember, she's the one who did the reset button with the Russians and gave them the technology that we are now all supposed to be in awe of, hypersonic missiles, which did strike Kiev the other day. Of course, Zelensky says they shot them all down. Complete nonsense. They hit every single target that they had. You can actually see pictures of it. They didn't shoot down a single hypersonic missile. Not possible. So Hillary Clinton, after they sold us out to China, and China became our manufacturer, especially for house goods and common things that we use. And basically, we were in debt, and we didn't put any tariffs, no tariffs whatsoever on the Chinese. She sold us out to China, and then she sold us out to Russia when she was the Secretary of State. And she was laundering money, of course, through Ukraine. So when you're talking about any modern technology in Russia, it has been given to them. And that's why Hillary went over there and started this wonderful relationship. So if there was any Russian collusion, it was with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton before him with the Chinese. And to this very day, it's true. And when I love calling him O'Biden, because why? Biden is nothing more than the same program that Obama was on. Remember, Obama, that's not his name. He's not African American. He is from Indonesia. We have proof of that on his own birth certificate. So when they say that Trump was the birther conspiracy, saying that Obama wasn't born in America, it was Hillary who started that during the campaign. Don't forget that. Hillary is the one who attacked Obama and said that his birth certificate was fake, and it is fake. That was proven over and over again that it was basically just what do you call it? photoshopped. So Biden and his birth certificate.
Keep calling him Biden.
Well, I know I do. Obama and Biden are one and the same being. They're a criminal family. Barack Obama's mother was a CIA agent, and her parents were CIA agents. They worked through the International Institute in Hawaii. We've given you all that evidence, and when we say something, we don't say it if we don't have evidence. And we had all the evidence on this. So Durham's report is completely a treasonous action. No one's going to get prosecuted. Hunter Biden, unless they decide, and they decided that Joe Biden was going to run again, so they're not going to go after Joe Biden. They're going to have to protect him. So Hunter won't be prosecuted, just like Hillary wasn't prosecuted, just like Comey wasn't prosecuted, Andrew McCabe wasn't prosecuted, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, John Brennan, Clapper, all of them. None of them have been prosecuted, though we know for a fact their crimes are beyond treason. They are traitors to America. And now, of course, what they're trying to do, and the reason that it's very depressing, is we have been overthrown. Of course, we never were a free country. The British never let us out of their control. We did not win the American Revolution. And basically, Biden is trying to crash the economy. That's the reason he took us off of having oil independence. That's the reason there's no tariffs on China. That's the reason we've given about $30 or $40 billion to Ukraine. It's the reason all the lies are happening in Ukraine. It's the reason we're going to a central bank digital currency. It's the reason that the IMF just went to a universal monetary unit which they call a unicorn, or basically it's their own cryptocurrency. So if there's no reserve currency at the IMF based upon the American dollar, we have lost control completely. That's the reason that Jerome Powell keeps raising rates at the Fed. It's the reason that Yellen is Yellen, and she keeps yelling that basically we are going to crash. We are headed towards the rocks. No one's at the helm, and we are going to wreck. That's the reason 81 nations are joining BRICS. But don't believe for a second what they tell you. They tell you that Russia and China has all the gold. That is complete and absolute nonsense. But they can create a different form of assets that back up whatever currency they're going to use for trade. What they'll probably do is just that everyone will go with their own currencies. That's already happened. We've already seen Russia do that with China. $86 billion petro deal between Russia and China when they blew up Nord Stream 1 and 2, when the British blew up the two pipelines going across northern Ukraine and this pipeline going across southern Belarus, and when Zelensky turned off all oil going across Ukraine, coming out of Russia, coming from Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, that basically is choking Europe to death. And this is consciously done. We are about ready for the ultimate fall of the Western civilization. And basically, it's because the Brits weren't successful with Brexit. So they started all this nonsense. And we are controlled by the Brits. And so Biden will not stop because remember, he's not Biden. But he is, the plan that they have is a megalomaniac plan that he will go down in flames because they don't care about him. Hunter Biden will not be prosecuted, or if he is, he will simply have a little slap on his hands. And we are ready for the big economic crash that has been predicted for years. And every single intelligent financial advisor out there, anyone who knows anything about the economy, knows that we are ready for the crash. And they've already set it up with Fed line. We've described that to you. And in July, it's supposed to become Fed Now. And if you don't switch over and join the ESG requirements, and that's what happened with Bud Light, that's what's happening with all these companies.
Tractor Supply, all of them promoting this anti-godly stuff about humans. Just awful. It's like we're living in Sodom and Gomorrah. It couldn't get more disgusting. And then what do? We've got to walk away. We don't want to look back. And then the other analogy too is it's just like being on Noah's Ark. We spent all this time building the ark. It's time to close the door, and you look outside and you see all this suffering and pain that are waves just hitting the sides of the boat. It's so much. But yet here we all are in the shift of, or the collapse of civilization, right at the cusp. And we're here.
And we've told you the only things you can do, and that's to become a prepper, a horticulturalist, to put your money in coined American coins, minted American coins that are silver and gold. And that's basically what JP Morgan is counting on. And that's the reason JP Morgan's allowed to do all the crimes they're doing right now. They are allowed by the Treasury to manipulate silver to handle the derivative markets. So the Bank for International Settlement will become the clearinghouse for all cryptocurrencies used by nations. So when it comes down to it, there's going to be nothing standing behind the BRICS money. The BRICS currency will have nothing standing behind it. They should create a basket of assets, but there won't be such a thing because they found out in America, you don't need anything but credit and faith that people will keep using your currency, knowing there's nothing behind it and that you will just print fiat currency, which should devalue your money. And so you have Biden basically stating, we're not in a recession, we're not in a depression, there's no inflation. And basically what's he doing? Just printing money. But now the debt ceiling, the only reason he's fighting the debt ceiling, because the debt ceiling is a joke, folks. It's now, no one knows how much we owe the U.S. Federal Reserve.
They can't print enough money to pay American citizen taxpayers taxes. They can print it for everybody, but not for the taxpayer.
Yeah, they treat the invaders at our southern border better than they treat citizens. And this is, of course, who set the tone for that? The Brits. And basically, it's they're allowing the invasion for the destabilization so that the people at the top, through the World Economic Forum, used to be the United Nations and the World Bank, the IMF. No. Now it is the World Economic Forum. But none of those people are in alignment with each other. They all are warring against each other. So what's going to happen? Unfortunately, these idiots have become so accustomed to lying and getting away with it that they're going to attempt a crash, a fake crash, which will be a real crash to all of us out here on Main Street. But Wall Street, no, they're all covered. And we've explained how that's true. So the point is, we are at the end of America's, the American experiment, the British American experiment. And they're calling back in their power here in America. They're manipulating us. They are the globalists. They are the Pilgrim Society. They are the Council on Foreign Relations. They are the World Economic Forum. Remember that the number one supporter of the World Economic Forum is King Charles III. And before that, it was his relative in Holland, who actually helped start it with Klaus Schwab, who is, of course, from a Nazi family, a family that the Nazis loved so much, they gave them awards during the war for being supportive in the industrial realm for the Nazis. So we are talking about fascism, economic fascism. We're talking about what you would call communism, but this is a new form of communism. It's the capitalistic experiment of the British on America, and they are now calling in their debt, and our debt is at minimum $31 trillion to the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is owned by who? British bankers. So it's nothing new under the sun. All civilizations go through this. All fiat currencies die. And basically, capitalism, as they would call it, democratic capitalism, which we are certainly not a democratic capitalistic society. We are a constitutional republic. And we never had a free market because in 1913, when the U.S. Federal Reserve was created, that was the end of anything free in America, and we became economic slaves to the British bankers. So we call them Radnites now, Babylonian Radnites. It's the same old bankster families.
It's the merchant bankers.
It's the merchant bankers. And so, folks, get your gardens going. Get some spendable bartering gold and silver. Do not expect any hope coming out of Washington, D.C. And when you see the Congress with Jim Jordan getting all upset, well, no one gets prosecuted. They don't have prosecutorial power. They have to make recommendations to the DOJ, and the DOJ always protects their own. That's why they're there. They're the Department of Injustice, and basically they are the cleaners. They are the fixers for the political class in Washington, D.C. As far as I'm concerned, we need another revolution, but it's against our own government. We need to basically eliminate the federal government and go back to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and start over again, making sure that we have no association with the British government.
Oh, you mean we're going to end our special relationship with them?
We're going to stop being the lapdog of the Brits.